Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today, we're going to talk about ShadowPad, one of the most successful paid backdoors in Chinese espionage. ShadowPad was used as the primary backdoors for several infamous attacks, including CCleaner, NetSarang, and ShadowHammer supply chain attacks. In this talk, we would like to address the following questions. Why did it become the primary choice in those high-impact attacks? What makes it so special in the pages of Chinese espionage? What threat actors are using ShadowPad in their operations? And ultimately, how does the emergence of ShadowPad impact the wider threat landscape from Chinese espionage actors? I'm Yi-Jhen, and now I'm a threat intelligence researcher at SentinelLabs. I personally focus on malware analysis and Chinese-based espionage campaign tracking.
I'm Chen, and also a threat intelligence researcher at SentinelLabs. My major area was research, including incident response, APT investigation, malware analysis, and cryptography analysis.
Today, we will start with some background history of ShadowPad. Then we will dig into its technical details and the business model behind this backdoor. After that, we will introduce some of the threat actors who are using ShadowPad and how ShadowPad changes the actors' operations and the landscape. At the end, we will provide some mitigation advice on how to discover the potential infection of ShadowPad in your cooperation network. Before we jump into the details of ShadowPad, let's start from some historical background of it. So, what is ShadowPad? It is a modular backdoor, which means it's formed of a bunch of plugins, and it is in shellcode format. Every plugin contains a specific functionality, and you can plug or unplug a plugin in memory from the CNC server. This offers good extensibility to ShadowPad's functionality. ShadowPad has been used by some high-profile threat actors, and it was used in those campaigns as one of the primary backdoors for intrusion. For example, it appeared in some well-known supply chain attacks conducted by APT41, including CCleaner, NetSarang, and ShadowHammer. Another high-profile group, TIC and Tonto team, also used it to attack Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency and other victims. We'll cover more details later. When we trace back to the emergence of ShadowPad, we need to spend some time discussing another backdoor called PlugX. PlugX is also a plugin-based backdoor in shellcode format. The major difference between PlugX and ShadowPad is that the plugins of PlugX cannot be plugged or unplugged during runtime. Regarding the users of the two backdoors, ShadowPad is only shared beyond a limited set of users, at least based on our knowledge, while PlugX is widely used and sold to different people in public. What's the relationship between these two backdoors? There are already some reports that discuss their code similarity, and we will not cover more on this part here, because we discovered another piece of evidence. Actually, PlugX and ShadowPad share the same project name as Hsieh. We extracted the PDB strings of their controllers, and you can see S controller and Hsieh here. This suggests that ShadowPad is highly likely the successor project to PlugX with a related project base. If we dig deeper to the author of PlugX, we can trace back to a name WHG, aka Wu Huaguo. He was based in Sichuan, China, and he was an experienced programmer with deep knowledge of backdoors and hacking tools. According to a report from AT&T, his nickname showed up in some PlugX samples, like here. Besides, he claimed that he was selling some shared software on his personal website back in 2006. Which it means that he was used to monetizing his malware development skills and the program he produced. Also, He was sharing some deep connections with one of the biggest users of ShadowPad, ABT41, and we will address this later. So after the background introduction, we can move to something more technical. As I mentioned earlier, ShadowPad is a modular design. It is formed of a bunch of plugins with different functionalities inside. This picture shows the brief concept. First, there is a layer of obfuscated shellcode loader. It decrypts and loads a plugin called root. The obfuscation is quite simple. It adds an E8 in the middle of the code blocks. So the disassembler will mistranslate the E8 to a call instruction. And the following assembly will be messed up. So if you want to fix the instruction, just modify the E8 to null bytes or not after 2 conditional jumps to the same address. By this way, you will get the correct assemblies and the control flow. So the shellcode loader decrypts and loads root. You can easily tell what root is by its name. It's the very basic plugin to decrypt and load other plugins which are embedded inside the samples. And it will contain the block of encrypted configuration. The plugins will be loaded into memories and they will be kept in the linked list for further reference. On the right is the structure of the plugin node in the linked list. There is some metadata inside, like the timestamp of the plugin ID, the size, the base memory address of the plugin, and the export function table address. Aside from the plugins embedded in the sample, additional plugins could be uploaded to the infected host from the CNC servers. For example, if the disk plugin is not embedded in the sample at the first place, after ShadowPad connects back to the CNC server, the attacker can upload the disk plugin through the controller. The plugin will be sent to the infected computer, and the backdoor will decrypt it, load it into the memory, and store the plugin inside the linked list as well. This gives the user a big flexibility to add plugins whenever they need. Every plugin has a fixed format of its start function. This function will be referenced several times, and the different command ID will trigger a different action. So for example, if the command ID is 1, the export function table will be failed. Command 64 will present the plugin installation routine. Command 66 returns the plugin ID, and the command 67 returns the plugin name. These 2 commands are quite useful when you want to retrieve the plugin name and ID dynamically. And plugin 68 will return the base address of the export function table. From the sample sets we collected, we got 22 unique plugins. I briefly divide the plugins into 2 sets. The first set is basic set. This set of plugins cover the routine from the installation of ShadowPad and firing back the first beacon connection back to the CNC server. In other words, with this set of plugins, the backdoor can build the connection with CNC servers, but at this moment, it will not contain any other backdoor functionalities. And the second set is utilities. This set contains the plugins with all kinds of backdoor functionalities, such as browsing disks, managing services and registries, executing shell commands, keylogging, screen control, and so on. Only with these plugins, ShadowPad can present the functionalities of a backdoor. So to use ShadowPad, the user definitely needs to have utility plugins. Regarding the configurations, this table shows all of the columns in the configuration. The first 2 columns, offset product key and offset nodes, are the identifiers of the campaign. They could be randomly generated. And later comes the binary path and some service settings and run key registries. So the default name of the service is my test. So this could be a useful indicator to check ShadowPad infections in some cases. And when you see a service named myTest, or if you see a run key with names like myTest, probably it's one of the ShadowPad infections on your host. And the spawn process to do code injection here, and the CNC servers, proxy types, and DNS. In 2020, another new version of ShadowPad was found by Positive Technologies. The infection chain of the new version includes 3 components. The first one is a legitimate executable log.exe, and it will sideload an obfuscated loader called log.dll. This loader will then read and decrypts another piece of payload, log.dat. Log.dat is the main shellcode of ShadowPad, which is also obfuscated with the same technique. The obfuscation technique is new to ShadowPad. The control flow is flattened by each instruction. So as this picture shows, after an instruction is executed, there will be another function to jump to the next instruction. And after that function is called, there's a D word. This D word represents the offset of the next instruction to jump to. By this, it will be harder to do static analysis on the sample. We need to reassemble the instructions to proceed further analysis. The configuration of this new version looks pretty similar to the previous one, except that it includes more details of the infection chain. So as here shows, there are columns for installation directory, the legitimate executable name, loader name, and the payload name. Next, we're going to introduce one version of the ShadowPad controllers. We discovered it in an attacker's hacking package. The controller helps us a lot in the research because it allows us to get a much closer look at how ShadowPad works and how it was originally designed. This one is version 1.0 in 2015, and it was written in Delphi. The controller contains both the binary builder and the CNC listener in one. The ShadowPad sample built by this controller are a bit simpler than the later version on the string decryption algorithm, but the samples are already constructed in a very much similar way to the samples after 2017. When we take a closer look at the list on the left-hand side, there are several options. Users is the interface to check the infected hosts, as here shows. Transfer lists all of the uploading and downloading text in progress. Listen is CNC listener. You can configure the protocols you want to use and the ports to listen to on the listeners. Setting is empty in this version. And builder is literally the binary builder of ShadowPad. By right-clicking on a single infection host, we will enter the management console of the backdoor. First, you will see the default plugin list. These plugins are the plugins which are embedded in the backdoor samples by default. If you want to use other plugins, you need to right-click on the console, choose Add, and import the plugins. Then the plugins will be uploaded. After that, you will see the uploaded plugins in red, and you can start using those plugins with the menu on the left. To be noted, you can only upload the plugins when the list of the control interface is fixed. So even if you have an additional plugin, like a plugin pipe here, you still cannot use it because there is no control interface of pipe in the list. Then here comes the builder. The builder allows us to configure different columns like campaign code and nodes. They can also be randomly generated by a bottom. And then there are some anti-debugging settings like anti-debugger, anti-VM, anti-sandbox, checking applications, and so on. In the installation settings, we can configure the service name and description and the run key registry we want to use. Also, we can modify the process to be spawned and injected during runtime. Of course, we can add the CNC servers with different protocols to connect to. After we finish the setting, we can export the current setting and then import them next time. And then we just need to build it. There is an option of building it as an executable, but the loader is pretty dumb. We didn't source any samples with this loader. This function might be improved in a later version, but it seems that most of the users only generate shellcodes and use their own loaders with this button. The discovery of the controller allows us to get more deeply on how ShadowPad works from the attacker side. In the next section, we're going to introduce the ecosystem and the business model behind ShadowPad from our observations and assessments. Let's start with the structure of the controller. The plugins are placed in a directory. Whenever the user needs to upload the plugin, they can choose the one they need from the directory. So in theory, any plugin encrypted and compressed in the correct format could be uploaded. If anyone wants to add a new plugin, he or she can develop one and upload it to the client side. But in practice, the user needs an interface on the controller to interact with the plugins. When we check the controller, we will see those interfaces listed on the left, and there is no other option to upload a new interface for any new plugin, which means the controller is not designed to accept new plugins. The list of available plugins is highly controlled by the developer. Based on the controller, we now know that ShadowPad is not designed to be extendable by a random user. The developer controls which plugins could be added and used, so ShadowPad is not an open framework like Metasploit to accept other self-developed plugins. Then, why is it designed to be a plugin-based malware and allows remote upload to the plugin? Probably it is because the developer can easily control the plugins to be used by any user. If the developer wants to remove certain functionalities, he or she only needs to remove that plugin from the directory and does not need to recompile the controller and the malware to be built. Next, let's check the plugins embedded inside the samples. As I described beforehand, there are some plugins embedded in the sample by default, and additional plugins can be uploaded remotely later on. We plot the plugin numbers across around 100 samples. As you can see, most of the samples only contain less than 9 plugins. And the plugins are the basic sets, including root, plugins, config, install, online, and the plugins for CNC communication. These plugins can only finish the installation and send the beacon to the CNC server. No other functionalities could be presented. If the attackers want to use other functions, they need to upload those plugins from the CNC servers. Other two distributions are both special cases. The samples with 10 plugins are a special version packed by VM Protect, and all of the plugins are with different plugin IDs. The samples might have been used by APT41 for some campaigns, including ShadowHammer. The final category is the samples with additional utility plugins embedded in them, which means the attackers by default can use those plugins without uploading them manually. The samples in this category are all packed by the same packers, while the packers seem not to be provided by default with the ShadowPad builders. The users of this set of samples might have been some people with high privilege access to ShadowPad, and the developer of ShadowPad provides them a special version of builder to build the samples with utility plugins embedded in them. From the above observation, we can see that most of the samples do not have utility plugins embedded in them. The users need to upload other utility plugins remotely through the controller. And as I mentioned earlier, the plugins can be easily removed from the package. You just need to remove them from the directory. Besides, we found Tick used a tool with the same functionality of plugin called software in an overlap timeframe. Tick was one of the active users of ShadowPad and started to have access to ShadowPad from at least 2018. While they use ShadowPad as the main backdoor for intrusion, they sometimes still developed some small tools. We discovered a tool from them to list all of the installed software on the infected host, but around the same time, ShadowPad already had a plugin called software, which did exactly the same. By this, we can assess that Tick did not have access to that plugin, and that was why they developed another tool for the same purpose. So the plugins should be provided separately. The developer of ShadowPad could decide which plugins they are going to give to the users, and not all of the users have access to all of the plugins. At the same time, they also offer special versions of ShadowPad Builder to high-privileged users, which allows them to build the samples with more plugins embedded by default. So here is the brief summary of the potential business model behind ShadowPad. First of all, it is a sold malware, and the utility plugins need to be bought separately. The developer does not provide all of the available plugins to the users by default, and sometimes he or she offers special versions to some high-privileged users. Also, ShadowPad is only provided to a limited set of users, as we do not see a wide distribution like PlugX during our study. We will cover the users of ShadowPad in the next section. From the attacker's perspective, there are several reasons why ShadowPad is a good choice for them. First, it is pretty costly to develop a stable backdoor or a remote access Trojan, especially when it contains some complicated functionalities like BNC. It is hard to ensure such functionalities will not crash the programs on the client side. If the attackers outsource the development of the backdoor, the cost will be significantly reduced, and they can put more resources on the other parts of the operation. Besides, ShadowPad is a fully functional backdoor with a complete set of plugins. It covers most of the important functions of a backdoor, such as fixed browsing, show command execution, remote desktop, and so on. The attackers can also decide which plugins to buy. Because of the completeness of its functionality, we also saw some attackers choosing to use ShadowPad as the primary backdoor of intrusion. The last point is that using a shared backdoor will reduce the chances to be recognized. In the past, some campaigns could be easily attributed to a certain group because of the presence of some self-developed backdoors or tools. But using a backdoor like ShadowPad brings more difficulty on attribution. Security community will need more information to get the big picture, and that should benefit the attackers. Next, we are going to discuss the threat actors that have access to ShadowPad.
Okay, thanks to Yi-Jhen for ShadowPad's technical details and its history. Here we are going to talk about which threat actors are using ShadowPad. Despite being the potential successor to PlugX, ShadowPad is sold privately to a limited set of customers. We have identified at least 5 activity actors that using ShadowPad since 2017, like WINNTI, APT41, Tick and Tunnel Team, Operation Red Bonus, Operation Red Concours, and Fishmonger. Some public reporting from other vendors detail other possible users of ShadowPad, including Lucky Mouse and Tropic Trooper. However, we doesn't have the visibility of those activities. So later on, we will focus on those 5 actors' activity and what they do with ShadowPad. WINNTI is the first general name convention of the activity conducted by 2 subgroups, Barium and Lead. All of the defendants are based on Chengdu, Sichuan. Barium were one of the earliest threat groups which got access to ShadowPad. They not only attacked against the gaming industry, but also for several supply chain attacks from 2017 to 2018. Some of their victims include NetSarang, ASUS, and the CCleaner. During the supply chain attack against ASUS, the sample of ShadowPad were highly customized compared to other ShadowPad sample we discovered. Every layer of shellcode and plugin was packed with VM Protect, and the plugin had different plugin numbers. Another subgroup lead also used ShadowPad along with other backdoors to attack victims for both financial and espionage purpose. There is an interesting thing is one of the actors, Rose, aka Diaoling Meigui, started his active collaboration on malware development with WHG, the author of PlugX, when he was a member of the hacking tool group NCPH back in 2005. So, what is NCPH? NCPH is a hacking group that gathering lots of geeks in Chengdu. The executable of controller was free shared on NCPH website, but they also declared that the source code was on sale. And the NCPH remote controller software developed by Rose and WHG in the past. They have great security knowledge and good programming skills, developing a lot of backdoors and hacking tools. However, both Rose and WHG will minimize their malware development skill back in the day. Considering the long-term affiliation relationship between Rose and WHG, we suspect that Rose likely had high privilege access or was a co-developer to ShadowPad. And other close colleagues in Chengdu are likely sharing resources together. This could also explain why Barium was able to utilize a special version of ShadowPad in some of their attacks. Here is another group, Tick and Tongdou. Tick and Tongdou has been an active user of ShadowPad since 2018. Those two groups merged into a new institution during the reorganization of PLA. They already been identified significant resource sharing between them, such as overlap of CNC infrastructure and the utility of similar toolset. A notable change after the merge was that they start to use ShadowPad as their primary backdoor for conducting intrusion activity. In the past, they were known to develop their own backdoor for their operation. Throughout 2019, Tick crafted and sent spread phishing email to deliver ShadowPad in victims' network for information stealing and long-term espionage. In 2020, Tongdou exploited CVE 2019-9489 and CVE 2020-8468 in Chen security solutions that were exposed to the internet in order to deliver ShadowPad in internal network for further exploitation. Based on the sample set we collect, Tick and Tongdou used at least 5 different versions of ShadowPad. However, all of the samples only contain the basic set of the plugins. Because they still have the ability to develop the tools by themselves. Although they turn from self-developed backdoors to acquired or leaked backdoors, they still develop some customized tools for intrusion, such as modified minicats, a screen capture tool, a package transmission tool, a tool to list all the software installed on this computer, and a VBScript command executor tool. In addition, we found a VBScript command executor tool builder which can generate a payload of VBScript without built invention technical to bypass Trend Micro products. Most important of all, why we think ShadowPad sell plugin? Because we saw this case. Kik decided not to buy full version of it, and they decide create tool by themselves. Here is another cluster. We got a ShadowPad activity cluster which had a non-clear link to known threat groups. We also track this activity and name it as Operation Red Bonus. The first activity of ShadowPad we discovered occurred at the end of 2019. All the samples we collected from Operation Red Bonus were running the same version of ShadowPad. During our investigation, we also spot other backdoors in use, such as Whitebird, IceFrog, and a customized instance of PC Share. The actors show interest on India targets with several DDoS domain tools spoofing some India institution. And another cluster of ShadowPad samples without a clear attribution in a public domain. Interesting part is all the CNC server extract from the samples had same self-signed certificates. Some related samples were documented to be the part of proxy logon attack, according to a report by Hsieh. And here is the last cluster. Has been active since at least 2018, and we call it Fishmonger. The victims include university, government, media sector, technology company, and healthy organization that conducting COVID-19 research in Hong Kong, Taiwan, India, and the US. The cluster is tracking based on the overlap of infrastructure and indicators, as well as some behavior connected between different campaigns. Back in 2019, the actor used a special version of ShadowPad, which allowed them to generate samples with a handful of plugins embedded by default. In 2020, they gained access to a new version of ShadowPad, which had updated and more advanced obfuscation techniques. We found there is a self-signed certificate is installed on several CNC servers of ShadowPad and Spider. So this group used ShadowPad and Spider as their primary backdoor for long-term monitoring and their target now. This section, we will talk about how does ShadowPad's emergency influence the threat landscape of Chinese espionage activity. We will use a famous Chinese espionage actor as an example, and we have been monitoring this group at least 4 years. It is not a secret that a number of Chinese threat actors develop their own tool set based on their need during operations. However, in order to establish espionage, threat actors will also need other tools to add in their operation. For example, Minicats, Hsieh, PlugX, and Ghost Rate. Or the popularity malware recently, such as ShadowPad and the Cobalt Stripe, among Chinese espionage groups. Here, we use Tick as an example. It was one of the most active users of ShadowPad, according to our research. Prior to this, tick was documented to be use self-developed backdoor, including deserve, XSMM, and debtor. There is a notable change we discovered during the monitoring of these threat groups, and we draw this change in a timeline table. According to the timeline, we could see this actor stopped the usage of their self-developed backdoor and start to use the backdoor they bought and name this backdoor as Casper. This backdoor, Casper, is the ShadowPad. So, what is the benefit of this change and why they decide using self-developed backdoors to occurring backdoors? There are two answers that could answer those questions. First one is actors want to lower the cost, like every big company, you know. So how they can lower the cost? No need to spend time on a well-designed malware and reduce the human resource to develop the malware. Second one is the occurring backdoor usually enhance the stability and the usability. The seller need to have a goodwill for their product, so they will provide newest version of the backdoor with newest feature added. And this, unlike community malware found in cybercriminal or underground forum. Now, we talk about some mitigation advice to detect and prevent attacks that use ShadowPad. First one, auditing all the service and the register to find any suspicious item, which is very important. During the execution of ShadowPad, a service and the run key registry is bound to gain persistence in victims' environments. Regularly reviewing the list of the service and the register can help identify infected hosts. Second is monitoring dynamic behavior of spawning a new process or process injection. Because ShadowPad includes creating a new process, inject the malicious code into a new process, and create a remote thread to execute the main routine. So, monitor those behavior could provide you some insight about being attacked by ShadowPad. Third is apply memory forensic to identify malware which reside in memory. A good memory forensic tool could help you identify the signature of ShadowPad. If the above advice is too difficult for you to approach, using EDR solutions could help. A good EDR solution could catch and stop suspicious activities and send alert to security team for further investigation. And last is having a well-consolidated monitoring capability in your organization. Make sure you are capable of gain deep cross-enterprise visibility or identify gaps in your organization's capability to prevent the supply chain attack. Now, we make up our conclusions. The conclusion with 3 questions. When we're doing this research, we keep asking ourselves those questions. Why do the actors choose to use ShadowPad? And why ShadowPad is not disappearing? And how ShadowPad affects threat intelligence? About why actors choose ShadowPad, we count some ideas. ShadowPad was created by an experienced developer, and it is also under active maintenance on both its functionality and its anti-forensic capability. So that is good for actors. Also, using ShadowPad reduce the cost of development, and using ShadowPad could make security company hard to do further research about it. And the second question, why ShadowPad is not disappearing? One of the reasons is that malware is still under update right now. With more advanced obfuscation and persistent techniques. The other reason is ShadowPad is a powerful backdoor with so many functionality and so good for long-term espionage operations, and good at keep itself stealthy under radar. The last question, how ShadowPad affect threat intelligence? To be honest, it affects a lot. If threat intelligence researchers want to do attribution research, they need to require careful validation and strong evidence to support so that it could help the community's effort in identifying Chinese espionage groups. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.